The league for the league. Yes! Very interesting journey so far, constructing the list and thinking about how I'm going to tackle this season 2 of the league. The leagues of Votann certainly have given me quite a few more options than I had in the previous outing with the Chaos Space Marines. It's a very potent force. There are lots and lots of options when you're choosing between the different leagues themselves, the units we have available, combining them with stratagems and relics and warlord traits. It's a very, very spicy faction. So it's been a completely different experience to what I had in the last league, but it has been fun. Putting the controversy of the faction aside, because I think some people love them, some people hate them, some people are interested in them. I have enjoyed it so far before playing any games, and I do have the wonderful ability to run such a beautifully painted army by Fletcher. So it'll be very fun to run such a nice looking force in the league for you guys anyway. So let's get on to the list for the league as it stands currently. I'm running them as the Ymyr Conglomerate. So what does that mean, I hear you cry? Their league custom is Master Armorers, which I think, looking at the other options and also like the custom leagues you can take, I think this is the best one because I built around it. Now, our Leagues of Votann army until this point has been quite small. Small because they're dwarves. So we've added a bunch of units for the league, which has bolstered the army for all different uses, but it has given us the option to build a list around Ymyr. So what Master Armorers means is that for any models I have with a 2+ armor save or more, I get a 4-up invulnerable save in addition. And for anything without a 2-up armor save, I get a 5-up invulnerable save for everything else. So all of my infantry units, my non-Hekaton vehicles, everything is just that bit more survivable. And when you combine that with void armor, it just makes everything that much more survivable on top of all of the things that you can give them anyway. So that across the army is a really, really nice option. And the other thing you get with Master Armorers is you get an additional 4 inches to your range of your ranged weapons. So some of the bigger guns have quite a large range anyway, but for some of the more zippy units with shorter range, it just makes them a little bit easier to maneuver units around without being too close to get into charge range. And it also means that you might be able to get a little bit closer to a corner of the board or an objective while still being in range with your guns. So although it's only 4 inches, it can make quite a big difference when you're doing all the various things that you will do over a turn of the Arcs of Omen missions. So that is their league custom. So I feel like that's probably the best one. And we'll go over obviously all of the units that will affect in short order. Short order. So why don't we go into some of the units I'm going to take? I'm going to start with the non-HQ units because then I can talk about all of the buffs I can give these units afterwards when I go into the HQ stuff. So I have no troops. I'm not taking any troops at all. I didn't feel like they were giving me enough for the way I want to run the army and the secondaries I'm planning on taking. And now at the moment here, there is no need to take troops. They are good, but for me, they just didn't work in this list. So no troops at all. But we do have some elite choices. And the first one I'm taking is a unit of Hearthguard. Now, arguably, they're not the strongest unit in the book, but for the way I'm running them, I do quite like them as a bodyguard unit and also as means of zipping across the board. It's a unit of 5 Hearthguard. Everything has a concussion gauntlet, and they have their Volkite disintegrators. So a relatively nice rate of fire, relatively good range with the extra given to me from Ymyr. But on top of that, when they do get into combat with the concussion gauntlets, they do become quite tasty. So strength 8, -2, damage 2, with 2 attacks each and 3 on the Hesir, which is the champion. So they're pretty good at being in combat. They're pretty good at range for their cost. But when you combine their 2-up save with now a 4-up invulnerable save because of Ymyr, they do become quite difficult to get through. And you're going to have to put in a little bit of, well, a fair bit of your shooting or combat to delete the unit. So they are a relatively good distraction, which means that either your opponent's going to have to deal with them, or they're just not going to be worried about too much, and you can use them for doing actions or just sneaking into a table quarter or being a bodyguard unit to a character, etc, etc. The other thing I've given them is the teleport crest. Now you can give the Weafield crest if you want to, which will benefit the Hessia, who is the champion. Now because I'm taking Ymyr, there's not really much point doing that because I've already got a 4-up invulnerable save, so that doesn't really benefit me too much. What I am taking instead is the teleport crest. So that will allow me to deep strike if I wish at the beginning of the game, so I could put them into reserve and drop them in. They do have quite small bases, so they can fit into relatively small gaps, so it means that I can then use them if I decide to take something like behind enemy lines. I can squeeze them into a gap if I want to get a charge off potentially, or add some pressure on certain parts of the board. It means that I can zip over to a certain quarter onto an objective if I want to. So there are some nice options there by taking the teleport crest, because I don't really need the Weafield because I get most of that with Ymyr anyway. There's an argument here to use a stratagem to give the Hessia a relic which is called Warp Strike. Now that would cost me an additional command point, and I'm spending quite a lot across this army anyway, but what that does mean is that I can, once per game, I can use the ability to pick a unit up and drop them down somewhere else for 0 command points when it normally costs 2. It also allows me to be able to charge horizontally through walls and other units and things like that. It does give me a bit more utility, but this unit is not a core part of the list. So there's an option to do it. I might think about it later on if things aren't going well. But for now, that's basically what that unit's going to do for me. So moving on to the next unit, I have 2 units of Beserks. So the Beserks are a new unit, and they look very nice. Thank you to Fletcher for doing these. They are a very, very potent combat unit. Now, they are arguably quite flimsy, but when you are running them as Ymyr, they do require a bit of effort to get rid of. So with the invulnerable save and the shrug, they are as survivable as they can be with the rules that are available to me. They also have the Cyber Stims rule, which means I can reroll charges. And they also, bundled into that rule, are able to fight on death. So with all of those things combined with the use of 0 stratagems, you've got a 5-up invulnerable save, a 5-up shrug, you reroll charges, and you fight on death. They're very good as they are. I've decided to give them all concussion mauls. So concussion mauls make them strength 10, -3, and damage 3. It does mean that I am having to subtract 1 from my hit roll, so they will be hitting on 4s, but there are stratagems available where I can reroll my hits, so that can be counteracted quite nicely with that stratagem. So they are a very heavy hitting combat unit. If I'm charged, I'm going to hit back when I fight. If I'm killed and I can fight on death, they're going to take a little bit of effort to actually kill because of their invulnerable save and the shrug. So all in all, they're a really effective combat unit, and they're not as vulnerable as quite a lot of these Berserk type units are. Something like the Sisters of Battle one, the Repentia, for example. They hit harder and they are much more survivable as a comparable unit. So they're a really nice option. And I'm going to be casting them both about in Sagitaurs. So 2 units of 5 running around in 2 Sagitaurs. Now you can take Sagitaurs in a squadron of 2, and when you do so, you gain the Sagitaur squadron rule, which means that you set them up within 6 of each other, and then from that point onwards, they operate separately. You can, if you want to, split a unit of 10 into 2 units of 5 when you do this. I didn't really see a benefit of doing that. Correct if I'm wrong, I might be missing something here. But yes, both of my Berserk squads will be running around in the Sagitaurs. So where they normally have a 5-up move, they've now got the added option of having a bit of protection, and you get the 12-inch move from the Sagitaurs. The Sagitaurs have a 3-up save at toughness 7. They also get the benefit of the invulnerable save, so again, not as flimsy as you'd normally expect them to be. They've got a decent amount of firepower as well, so I've elected to take the L7 missile launcher and the Sagitaur missile launcher. In the book, there's a misprint which has been corrected since then. So the Sagitaur missile launcher gives you 2 shots at effectively a 40-inch range because of Ymyr. Strength 10, -3, damage 3. So a couple of really nice anti-armor shots there. And then in addition to that, you then get what is essentially a better frag and crack missile launcher than you normally expect with Imperium. So 30 inches or 34 with Ymyr. The focused missile gives you 1 shot, strength 9, -2, d6. And then the blast option, again, 34-inch range, d6 shots, strength 5, -1, damage 1, blast. So much better than the Imperial version because it's +1 strength and an additional pip of AP. So those 2 options combined is a really nice option. I think I'd take that over the High Beam Cannon or the Mater Auto Cannon because I've got enough anti-infantry in the other parts of the list. So just having a bit more anti-armor is quite nice, and having the L7 missile launcher is a nice bonus to be sort of targeting different things like that. So the Sagitaurs are there to cart my Beserks around, keep them nice and safe so they can get a charge off. So moving 12, disembarking 3, moving 5, and then re-rolling charges. They've got a pretty good chance, depending on the deployment, of course, to be getting charges off early doors. I don't want to rely on the invulnerable save and the shrug to keep them alive. I don't want them on the board for any time really, so lobbing in the Sagitaur and giving them a nice good boot down the battlefield is probably the best way of running them. So those 2 things combined should give me some nice protection for my elite combat unit, and then also once they've disembarked I can then pootle off somewhere else holding objectives, etc. with the Sagitaurs after that point. We'll then move on to the fast attack, and this is probably the linchpin of the list. If we had the time to get the max amount of models for these units, I would, because they're arguably one of the best units in the game at this point, and they are the Hernkyn Pioneers. So this is another fast attack choice. The 4-up save is probably the downside to them. They're a little bit flimsy, but because of the invulnerable save, they are, again, just that much more survivable. Because they're core, that means that I'm able to give rerolls when I'm able to. It gives me more options for a heap of different stratagems, and they're also OBSEC. So with the speed of them and the sheer amount of models, if you're taking 6 of them, that's quite a lot of wounds to chew through. You can give -1 to hit with stratagems as well to make them that bit more difficult to shoot, and you're going to have to invest in quite a lot of firepower to remove the unit. So early doors, you can hoon them pretty far, you can advance them as far as you can, and you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to be in different table quarters on an objective, etc, etc. And then you can think about what to do with them after that point. Your opponent can deal with them, but then there's a lot invested in completely removing those units. And there are some models in here which are sort of ablative wounds before you get to the really chunky stuff. So the way I've loaded them out is because I'm taking 6 of them, I'm taking 2 of the High rotary cannons. I'm also taking all of the other war gear options because you can do 1 of each on each of the models. So we've got a roll bar searchlight, a multi-wave comms array, and a pan-spectral scanner. So this gives me options for several different stratagems, which I won't go into now, but it does boost them up quite nicely. The roll bar searchlight means that I can remove dense cover, which is brilliant against infantry. My multi-wave comms array is really useful because it means that my Kâhl's reroll 1s has a 24-inch range rather than 6, so they can zoom off and still get the rerolls, which is super powerful. And also the pan-spectral scanner can remove light cover. So there's not really a huge amount of ways to hide from the anti-infantry offense that the Pioneers give me. You have to kill 2 of the models before any of my war gear options can be affected. So they've got a huge amount of utility, very quick. Being OBSEC, It's just obnoxiously quick and a very, not tough, but there's a lot of wounds to get through before you are removing the obsec from certain objectives. They're killy enough with their range. They're not super effective in combat, but you don't want them in combat anyway. They're designed to stay back, hold objectives. You can use them effectively in some of the secondaries are available, and there's an enormous amount of stratagems which can affect them too. You can fall back and shoot with a stratagem. They are brilliant. So 2 units of 6, you could take 3 units of 6, which I think is probably the most competitive way that you can run them. So you have that option if you have the time and the models available. So that's the fast attack done. I've got a heavy support choice, and you'll all be very surprised to know that is a Hekaton Land Fortress. One of the best vehicles in the game, in my opinion. It's a very, very tough tank with some really good offensive output as well. It does have a transport capacity. I am not anticipating putting anything in it, but you have the option if you need to. I've loaded it out with the 4 bolt cannons because I didn't want to go for the plasma version because of points. I wanted to get, I didn't want to drop anything else to take that instead, and it's not really worth it in my opinion. And I'm also taking the heavy Magna Rail cannon because it's the best option, I think. 40-inch range because of Ymyr. Only 1 shot, but it's strength 14, -4, 2d3 plus 6 damage, and you can't take invulnerable saves. So it's rank, it's horrible. And if you're shooting at something with some judgment tokens, which we haven't even discussed yet, so if you're being clever with your target allocation, it can wreck stuff real quick. So it's a really good option. It's a massive threat, which also means that you're going to have to put a pretty decent amount of offense into it to remove it. And there are other ways I'm going to boost it up as well, which we'll cover in a moment. If you don't deal with it, I'm going to shoot stuff really hard. And if you do decide to deal with it, then all my other units are free to do other things. So it's a really nice distraction piece. You might want to take 2 of them, but they are quite expensive. So I think 1's a sweet spot. I think 2 might be a trap. 1's very nice. So that's the majority of the list. In terms of my HQs, we'll start with the Brôkhyr. Yes, the Brôkhyr Forge-master. So this is going to be run with my Hekaton Land Fortress. And the reason for that is because it makes it hit better and makes it harder to kill. Spend the points to make it a Brôkhyr Forge-master. I've already said that. That gives me access to warlord traits, abilities, and an extra relic as well. We'll go to the warlord trait which I've given it, which is Master Armorer. Is a warlord trait, which means that instead of healing a vehicle D3 wounds, it just does flat 3. If I have any ECOGs available, it regains 4 wounds. So that's nice. Yeah, if you do manage to get some wounds through, I'll just heal 4 in my command phase. Well, that's very nice. And the other massive thing it does is once per battle round, when a saving throw is failed for a friendly vehicle, like a Hekaton, I make the damage 0 if it's within 6 inches of the Hekaton. Now, the key thing here is that I choose which failed saving throw I can have that effect. So it's not the first one, so you can't do pitter-patter to take that away. I can pick when that happens once per battle round. So if I'm being hit by something enormously large, of which there are lots of things, let's be clear at this point, in the game, I can make it damage 0. So that makes it even harder to kill and even more frustrating for your opponent. And if you do manage to get the wounds through, I can just heal it up really quickly in my command phase. And I found previously in games before, in the early parts of the game, people try and kill it. When they find out they can't kill it so good, I then get most of my wounds back after a couple more turns, and I'm just not necessarily being targeted. Now, this isn't going to work for some armies, and it probably will die, but it's going to soak up so much firepower in the process that the rest of my army is likely not to be super affected by it. So it's a really, really good option to take with the Brôkhyr, and I'd encourage you to do so if you're taking any Hekaton Land Fortresses. This is one reason why I wanted to take 1 rather than 2, because I can put all of my repairing power into that 1 unit, so it should last a relatively reasonable amount of time, so I can take damage away from the rest of the army, but also have my nice offensive firepower into effect for a bit longer as well. So that is the Brôkhyr Forge-master. We then have another HQ, which is the Einhyr Champion. So this is a offense focus, combat beast. He's a very, very good option. So I'm giving him a teleport crest because the Weavefield crest will do nothing for me. So he's another option for deep striking if I want to. I could deep striking with the Hearthguards. He also really benefits from the ability to teleport during the game because it only costs a character 1 command point, so that can be a really nice way of zipping across the board to deal with a particular unit, or zipping onto an objective or a table quarter behind enemy lines, whatever. He just becomes that bit more useful with that option. He's normally armed with his mass hammer, but I'm not an idiot, so instead I'm replacing the mass hammer with a relic, and that relic is called Exactor. So Exactor is busted to all hell, I think. So it is strength 10, AP 3, and D3 plus 3 damage. Now, each time I do an unmodified hit roll of a 6, the target suffers D3 plus 3 mortal wounds, and the attack sequence ends. So fishing for 6s is the way, and that is savage. So against quite a lot of units, he's probably going to kill them real bad in the face. So he is horrid beyond reason with that relic. You can give a warlord trait to give him some rerolls, but I don't really think you need it. You want to be careful because there are some really tempting relics and warlord traits that you can quickly run out of CP for the game. So I've elected not to do that for now. Might change my mind later on. But that combo of Exactor and him is gross. So yes, he will be murdering quite a lot of things and hopefully not dying. So that's him. And my last unit for this Leagues of Votann list is a Kâhl. And not any Kâhl, this is a High Kâhl. And the High Kâhl is my warlord. I've spent the points to make him a High Kâhl, and by doing so, I give him several things. It gives me access to the Experience Eye Warlord trait, which is essential for my plans in this League of Votann. It means that when he uses Grim Efficiency, which is when he allocates a Judgment token to a unit that he can see, I can do it twice. Not on the same unit, but I can allocate it to 2 units which I can see. So the name of the game in Votann is to rack up Judgment tokens as quickly and effectively as possible on key units. So that is a very important warlord trait to take because I can just rack things up early doors. I've also given him nothing else. Oh, I have given him something else actually. I've given him a relic. He is important to keep alive in this game. I'm probably going to be keeping him relatively close to the Hekaton for some protection. What happened? Something's exploded. The Hekaton might die. So what I have given him is the Ymyr specific relic. So this replaces his shield crest and gives him the last crest of Jaluk, which is a cool name. What this does is once per battle, I can activate the last crest of Jaluk and give him a 3-up invulnerable save. A 3-up invulnerable save. Yes, it's once per battle, but he's not going to be shot that often during the game. He might get charged. But he's not likely to get shot that often. So you really need to think about if you are going to charge him, whether it's worth doing so or not. And this is probably going to be in the latter stages of the game as well. So the option there is great. But on top of that, he also has a 4-up shrub against mortal wounds. So if you do kill my Land Fortune and it explodes, for instance, I've got a 4-up shrug against that. So it just means that there's less ways for him to die, which is always very important. So the High Kâhl on top of that will give reroll 1s to hit against my core units. Super important with my Hearthguard Pioneers. Because that's a 24-inch range, so that can keep going most of the time. He's already got a 4-up invulnerable save because of his Bastion Void armor, and of course he has Grim Efficiency as well. So yes, that's one of the most important abilities I need to keep effective throughout the game because Judgment tokens are the way to do the winnings. With all of those HQs combined, giving boost to every single unit in my army, the firepower is pretty good. The Judgment tokens, when they rack up throughout the game, means that my lower strength ranged offense is very powerful. I'm very quick, I've got so many very cheap stratagems which I can use. I'm not going to cover them right now, but there are so many which I can use for not many command points to make things even more potent. All in all, I feel like it's a really good all-comers list. Yes, in an ideal world, I'd probably just run max bikes, but I don't have them, so it doesn't matter. They have lots of things going for them. I've got the combat punch now with the Beserks, which we didn't have before. Now the models are painted. I've got some real threats, which can be traps. I've got lots of ways of getting points and quite a lot of options with secondaries as well, which I'll cover in just a moment. So there is one secondary which I'm probably going to take every single game, which is the Ancestors Are Watching. It's the Leagues of Votann specific one. So this is a no mercy, no respite option. At the end of each phase, I scored 2 victory points if one or more enemy units that have 1 or more judgment token is destroyed by a Votann unit. And I get an additional victory point if that unit had 3 or more judgment tokens. So, I mean, that's pretty easy, isn't it, really? Most things are going to have judgment tokens. And you can be smart with your target allocation to ensure that you get a lot of points really quick. This is also each phase as well. So you need to plan out your turn a bit, but you can rack up the points and max this pretty quickly. The only downside, which is kind of annoying, but it is a downside, because otherwise it would just be a bit obviously an auto take. At the end of the battle, I reduce the number of victory points I've earned by 1 for each unit on the battlefield, or that's embarked with a transport that has 1 or more judgment tokens. So there is a downside to it. So if I am not tabling someone, then I probably won't get max, but it's still a pretty good option. It's still a pretty good option. So that is one I'm likely to take every single time. Outside of that, it's actually a bit of a head scratcher, and it's very much going to depend on the opponent and the mission and the deployment. There aren't any secondaries which they're really going to struggle with necessarily, but there aren't any that are super obvious that I'll probably have them ready for every game. So the ones I'm thinking about taking, Shadow Operations, I'm more than likely going to be looking at retrieve battlefield data because it can be done on bikes. The downside with this obviously is that the bikes then can't shoot. So later on in the game, where things have got judgment tokens on and I've got a high rate of fire with these units, that's going to be a massive downside for me. So I would have it as an option if not much else made sense. But there it is. Raised banners might make sense on maybe one of the missions which has 2 objectives in a deployment. I think there's one in Arcs at the moment that does that, because then I can think about the High Kâhl and the Brôkhyr doing that for me. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't do that because I'm quite low in infantry. The army is quite small because they're Votann. So being elite, it then makes that a little bit less of a attractive option. So they're probably the least likely I'm going to take. Engage in all fronts is an interesting one because I'm so fast. So early on in the game, I can get out really, really quick and start racking up those points early doors without too much worry about getting annihilated. So that's an option with my speedy units. The other option I've got there is behind enemy lines. Because I've got some things that can teleport, and because I'm very quick, that could also be a sneaky one to use because my teleporting units have very small base sizes. I have strats which allow me to teleport again. So that one is quite tempting depending on the army I'm facing. If it's Horde, it'll be a bit more tricky. But then again, Horde are going to move forward. So again, it is certainly an option. Warpcraft, I will take against Chef because he's taking Thousand Suns, which is sad for Psyker armies, but here we are. No Prisoners is a obvious one against Horde. So this is quite tempting if I'm facing Mr. Stig. Grind Them Down is a trap. I'm not going to take Grind Them Down because I am tough but also vulnerable at the same time, so I don't think I'm going to worry about Grind Them Down at any point. Bring It Down again, maybe, I'm not sure about that one. And Assassinate, I don't know. So I think I'm probably going to rely on my speed, going to rely on my ability to zip across the board, and rely on my ability to kill stuff with judgment tokens because kind of obvious, isn't it? So that is kind of where my head's at the moment. It's very easy to sort of say, yeah, I could do this and this and this, but until you actually play the games and see the mission and the opponent, difficult to know, but there are certainly some that are more attractive than others. So that, my friends, is my Ymyr Conglomerate Leagues of Votann list analysis. I'll be very interested to hear your opinions. I don't think I missed anything. I've played this army twice, so I am learning as I go. So I will learn, you will learn. It's going to be a very learned experience. I feel like the army is pretty strong. I've got some nice options for secondaries, and I'm also quite tough because of Ymyr. So I feel like I'm in a good position in the league, certainly better than I was with Chaos Space Marines. Nice to be running such a beautiful army, and I'm excited to give them a spin and see how they do. Are they super powered? I don't know. It seemed like it, but there's also some very spicy armies in this league season 2. So we'll have to see what happens, won't we? Have to see what happens. I hope you enjoyed this one. Give me some tips in the comments. Pray to the AI for my victory across the league. But until next time, I've been Mr. Beard, and we'll see you very soon. Where do we start? Why don't we start with the league I'm taking, which is the Ymyr Conglomerate. Hang on a minute. Is this one? Is it? What? We'll come back to that. I can't remember what that does. Forgive me.